In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made this little girl's dress using shirring elastic around the top. So if you're not aware of what shirring elastic is, it's an elasticated thread which you use in the bottom bobbin of your sewing machine, and I will share with you my hints and tips for using shirring elastic and settings on your sewing machine and things like that throughout the video. So as you can see, I've got 3 tiers, 3 layers of fabric. You can make this all out of one if you wish, and I've added a couple of straps for security, and these just cross over at the back, but I've got some ideas later on for you as well for other ways that you can fasten that, maybe using ribbons and bows and things. Now this is a real dress it up, dress it down project, so you can keep it plain as a play dress, but if you wanted to make this into an occasion dress, you can maybe add some trimmings or some lace around the bottom. Would look lovely on this, even with a big underskirt underneath it, would make it very dressy. So it's quite a simple dress to make, and it's loads of fun doing the shirring. The first thing we're going to need to do is to start measuring. The first thing you need to do before you actually start cutting your fabric is to measure your child. I'd say my little mannequin here was around about a 3-year-old, small 4-year-old. But if you have child to hand, then you're going to measure around the chest. And mine here measures 21 inches, and then measure the length that you'd like as well. So from the top of the chest, where this is going to sit just underneath the arms, all the way down to however long you want it to be. Mine's going to be quite long. I'm actually measuring this down to 22 inches, which would be probably below the knee length on a mannequin of this size. But of course, if you wanted to make that shorter, make it longer, down to the floor, have a maxi dress, then that's entirely up to you. And do be aware of seam allowances as well. So however long you want this to be, if you're making it out of one piece of fabric, then you'll need to add probably ½ an inch at the bottom and ½ an inch at the bottom and ½ an inch at the top to allow for those seams. I'm actually making mine in tiers, so I've got 3 rows of fabric. So as I'm using a ½ an inch seam allowance, I'm going to add an extra ½ inch for each one of the seams. To be honest, that's not set in stone. I don't think it'll make very much difference to the look of the dress if it's going to be ½ an inch longer or shorter than what you actually planned. So you can go down there for just a second. So I've already cut my fabric pieces. So I've cut 1 to 5 inches or 13 centimetres, 1 to 7 inches or 18 centimetres, and 1 to 11 inches or 28 centimetres. And width-wise, my measurement was 21, so I'm going to double that measurement and then take off a couple of inches so that I've still got some stretch when this is being worn. I've also cut 2 long strips of fabric measuring 2 inches across or 5 centimetres, and those are going to make the straps that go over the shoulder, but I'll measure those when I've finished just to make sure that I'm putting them in exactly the right position. So okay, let's sew these together first of all. So again, these are long strips, and in fact it works out quite well for a dress of this size. That happens to be the width of the fabric. You may need to join 2 pieces together if you wanted to add some more fabric, so do that now. So first of all here, let's take these 2 pieces. Make sure if you have a directional fabric that it is the right way around, of course. And we're just going to sew these right sides together. I don't pin with things like this. Do feel free if you want to, but I find it easier just to line up the edges as I'm sewing. And away we go. So I'm going to sew the top spotty panel to the top of my fabric, and the bottom spotty panel to the bottom of the fabric. Or if you wanted to finish your seams, by the way, you could have cut the fabric out with pinking shears to start with. I'm not going to on this one. This isn't always necessary. Or this could actually be made with an overlocker or serger if you have one. Or if you wanted to finish the seams afterwards with a zigzag stitch, just to stop them, fraying as you're washing, then do feel free to do that as well, but I'm not going to on this dress. So those are my 3 pieces all sewn together. So I'm just going to switch my iron on and give those seams a press. And as I said earlier, I do have one piece of fabric that's slightly wider than the others. So I'll trim those down to all the same size now. Do that on my little cutting mat actually. So just make sure that they're all the same width. So a ruler, and a rotary cutter, and let's just trim this so it's all the same. Right, now normally I'd be using the large ironing board for seams like this, but this one's fine. And I'm just going to press to the pattern side. I'm not worried about pressing the seams open on something like this. And then you have a think about the way that you're going to make up the dress and the type of fabric that you're using. So the top area, I'm going to use the shirring elastic. At whichever point you're going to do this and however way you do it, then hem the dress at the top first, because you'll find that very difficult to turn over and hem once the fabric's all gathered. But if you have a rather plain fabric like this one, what I'm going to do is to sew this into a tube first, and then I'm going to shear in a circle. And that means it's going to make it a lot easier when I come to the seam at the back, because I'm going to be taking the elastic all the way around it. So I don't have to worry about joining the rows of elastic at the back. However, if you have a dress or a fabric, sorry, that has a stripe or has a check to it, then you may see that the stitches aren't perfectly straight. What I mean by that is, if you're sewing around in a circle, as I'm going to do with this dress, the stitches, your first row of stitches will be perfectly straight, your second one will be at a very slight angle, and in fact when you look at the front of the dress, it'll be 1/4 of an inch difference from one side to the other going down at an angle. You'll never notice that. As you're looking at the dress, you will never notice that. You won't pick up on that at all. But if you have a fabric that has a horizontal stripe or a check, you will, because your stitch line won't be running along the check. So if you're using a check fabric or a stripe fabric, what you're going to do after you've pressed it here is to sew from one side to the other. You can turn around and go back the other way, but you're literally going to sew all the way across the fabric. When all of that's finished, you still hem first. When all of that's finished, then you'll take the two sides and sew them together. Okay, but we're going to do it in the round on this occasion, which is a little bit quicker as well. Now, a few little tips when you're using shirring elastic. You're going to take up maybe a couple of bobbins of elastic thread for a dress of this kind of size. Maybe if you're making a larger dress, you're going to be using more thread. So if you've got some spare empty bobbins, it may be an idea to fill those up now, so that when you come to run out of thread, which you will do, you've already got the next one loaded up and ready to go. It's just a little bit less frustrating than having to stop and refill the bobbin and then come back and do it again. So I haven't filled mine yet because I wanted to show you how I do that as part of this video. So that's what I have at the moment, okay? So the 3 pieces sewn together. Because I'm sewing this in the round, I'm going to sew the 2 sides together first of all and then hem, because it makes the seam neater at the back. If you're not sewing in the round, so if you've got your check fabric, then you're going to hem now. Just fold that over twice and hem, okay? So let's sew these together first. It actually comes together really quickly, and it's not just for a child's dress. You know, this is something that you could maybe make yourself a little summer top with. And it's all made to measure. So again, literally just sewing down the sides here. And I'm matching the seams because I have got seams as I've put the panel in here. And it will stand out a little bit if the seams don't match perfectly. And down to the bottom. And then to hem over the top, I normally press that as well. I'm just going to fold this over once by about 1/4 of an inch and once again by about 1/4 of an inch, and so. That may be something you'd prefer to do at the ironing board, so you fold this over twice and press it. and then sew all the way around. It's quite easy to do this. And again, you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. All of this is going to be gathered at the top. So if your stitch line is a little bit wonky or your hem isn't perfect, then it's not going to stand out once the garment's finished. So again, let's just fold over as we go and sew all the way around the top. Now I'm going to hem the bottom later, because if you do have a child with you, then that would be a good idea to actually try the dress on and make sure you're happy with the length, because at this stage, or at that stage, you could add more to the length if you wanted to, or you could, so maybe another panel if it's not long enough, or you could shorten it if you needed to there as well. Okay, now we're going to use the shirring elastic to sew around the top to make it gather. If you want to create quite a deep frill on the top, it may be an idea to actually draw the first line that you're going to sew with. I'm going to use my presser foot up against the stitch line from my hem, so I'm going to be sewing just over 1/4 of an inch away from the top, and that's going to be fine for me, so I'm not going to draw that line in. Now with the shirring elastic, you need to take your thread and an empty bobbin and hand wind this. So only in the bottom, not on the top thread. And don't pull this too tightly. If you pull it too tightly, when you let it go, all of the elastic will just spring back out again. And don't make it too loose that it kind of goes baggy. So just take your time winding until the whole bobbin's full up. And because you're hand winding like this, that's why you're going to be needing to fill the bobbin quite a lot, because obviously with having no tension there and the elastics are a lot thicker than your normal thread, then it doesn't actually take very much to fill up the bobbin. So I'm just going up and down. I did see a tip actually that one of you left on a previous YouTube channel, YouTube video that I made, saying that she had dexterity problems and couldn't hand wind very well. So she did wind the bobbin on her sewing machine, but on a very small, slow speed. So that may be an option for you, and not to take it all the way through the threading system on your sewing machine. Literally pop it on the top and gently guide the thread up and down as you're winding it on. So I thought that was a great tip. It wasn't mine, but I thought that was a great tip, so I'd share it with you. Right, so we go as full as we can. Oh, shirring elastic comes in different colours as well, so do have a shop around if you can't find the colour that you like from your regular retailer. So I'm using white on this fabric, but if I was to use a black or a navy, you may see some of the elastic come through to the right side. So go for the colour of elastic which is closest to the fabric colour that you're using. Okay, I think that's about that. So we'll snip that off. And then this goes into the bobbin case. Whether you're a top loading bobbin or a bottom loading bobbin, just put your bobbin in there in exactly the same way. So that one comes out and this one goes in, and do make sure that you catch the tension. So I'm not going to use the thread cutter on this one. I'm going to hold on to my top thread and turn the hand wheel towards me so I can pull the shirring through. And then I'm just tugging it to make sure that the tension is engaged. Sometimes it can pop out, so do be aware of that when you're sewing. Two more things to do here. I'm going to lengthen my stitch to the longest one on this machine, which is number 5, and I'm going to tighten the tension as tight as I can possibly go, which on my machine is number 9. Always have a practice first on a scrap piece of the same fabric that you're using. Normally it's the longer the stitch and the tighter the tension, the more of a gather you're going to get, but do test these out. Oh, and by the way, a finer fabric works better. I'm using cotton poplin here, but a cotton lawn or a viscose or very fine fabrics work better than heavy fabrics. Heavier fabrics, like if you tried to shear denim, it really wouldn't gather up very well, so finer fabrics work better. Right, I'm going to start at the back seam. And oops, let's have a look on that one. And again, I'm running my foot just along the edge of the stitch. So my gathered section at the top, or the ungathered section at the top, is going to be about 1/2 inch. And let's sew. Now your machine may sound a little bit noisier than normal, that's absolutely fine. And as you start sewing, you may think, well, that's not gathering up very much. By the time you've done 2 or 3 rows, it seems to gather more and more for every row that you go. So persevere with it, and when you've finished, I do have a little tip for you to make the elastic shrink and gather it up even more. Right, so that's doing very nicely. I'm just coming up to that back seam again where I started, so instead of the stitches meeting here, I'm just going to veer off to one side and go to my next row of shirring. Now this time, this is already gathered, as you can see. I don't want to sew it as it's gathered because I'll be making pleats in the fabric, and we don't want the pleats. So I'm going to pull this slightly, it doesn't take very much, just so that I'm sewing on a flat piece of fabric. Don't pull it so hard that you're pulling any tension against the needle as you sew, but just enough to flatten that fabric out. And again, just check every now and again that you do still have elastic in the bobbin thread, because you will run out at some point. So now I'm just going to sew round and round in spirals until I've finished shirring the whole area that I want to. Again, I'm just coming back up to that back seam again, and because I've already kind of gone on a little bit of a diagonal, I can just carry on at that angle. And you can see now from this, it's gathering more, or it seems to gather more the more rows you sew. I'm just coming up to where I'm finishing off, and I'm going to just blend the stitch line into my last circle of thread, so to speak. So I don't just come to a full stop, I've actually graded that one back into the previous line. So I'm happy with that now. I think that's looking really pretty, and I've got plenty of stretch in there, but I'm going to try and gather it a little bit more because we are trying to reduce this by half. So I'll turn it inside out. Do be aware of your fabric. If you've got a fabric that won't take very much heat, then this may not work. But this is cotton, so it will take quite a high heat. I've got my iron with steam, and I'm going to hover it over the elastic. Oops, let's look there. And just let the steam touch the elastic, and the combination of the steam and the heat is actually going to make that shrink. I think you can probably see there it's starting to gather even more. So don't iron it like you're doing the laundry. Just hover this quite closely and keep it there for a few seconds. There'll only be a certain amount that it can shrink to, so you may go over this a few times and not see any more shrinkage, but that'll be the optimum amount that it'll go to. And on the other side. And this will stay shrunk as well. Get my frill out of the way. So just go around that, make sure that all of the elastic's been well and truly steamed. I'll just go over the side sections there. And here. Now we can try the dress back on. Obviously you'll have a child, not mannequin, and we'll just make sure that the length is how we want it to be. So pop you on there. Whoops. Which I think is perfect for this. You can just about see that there, can't you? But what I am going to do, just to support that a little bit more, because as you can see we may have a skirt if it's not tight enough, I'm going to put some shoulder straps over there as well. I think that's looking really pretty. So I've cut I've cut my fabric way too long, and it's 2 inches or 5 centimeters wide. So just allow a little bit for hemming at one side, And then you decide if you want the straps to go across at the back or straight over the shoulders. I think it might be quite sweet to have these crossing over. So let's have another pin in there. So you can see how this is going to look, and I think it's going to look very sweet. So she's standing on a roller there. And here. And again, let's cross over the back. Also, might be quite nice, have a think about it, if you have some matching ribbon, then you could make two ties, one at the front and one at the back, and tie them in a bow at the top. That would look very nice as well. Might even be easier to adjust that. You know, if you're making this for a child that you can't pin down to measure, be good. Right, I'm going to cut one strap so I know the right length. I'm going to replace the pin at the point where I want the straps to be. Now I've marked it. And the same on the front, because of course this is going to vary depending on what size you're making this in. There we go. Stay up. This is why we've got the straps on. Obviously when you have a child with skin, that's going to hold on a lot better. So we'll cut both straps to the same length. Now, depending on your skill set as well, this could be oh, plaited ribbon would look nice, wouldn't it? But you may want to put a button and a buttonhole on that. I put the button onto the dress and then the buttonhole into the strap. Might be a bit difficult to put a buttonhole on that bit. Let's pop you back down there again. And I'm going to press these. So this is going to be very much like we make bag handles or bias binding, but it's easier than trying to turn a loop through. So I'm folding in half lengthways, and then both long sides to the centre, and then we'll fold in half, and I'm going to stitch down each side. Like so. So you've got quite a nice narrow strap, but they're easy to make like this. And again, there's no reason why you couldn't make 4 straps in this same way and tie in the bows at the top. I did make a dress very similar to this in my book, Sewing Room Secrets, the Learn How to Sew one, Machine Basics. And that time I used ribbon and tied on the shoulder. I used one piece of fabric, so I didn't put the contrast bit in the centre, but I did copy. The fabric had rabbits on it, and I copied the design of one of the rabbits and made a larger plique piece on the bottom as well, so that you can really dress these up. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't add lace or a little bit of broad round glaze trimming around the edge or the bottom, or where I've added the 2 different tiers, you could gather those so you've got a very flouncy little dress. Wouldn't it look lovely with a little short cardigan to match? Okay, let's sew down each side of these, and then we'll sew them to the dress. Oh, before we do that, we need to put the regular thread back in the bottom and put your tension and your stitch length back to normal. We nearly had gathered straps. Right, so again, just going to sew down both sides of these. Just snip away those long threads, and then take your little dress. I'm just going to make sure that my centre back seam is in the centre back, and that where I put my pins in is going to be the same distance from each side. which that is. I think the front is looking okay too. Lovely, that's right over the centre. And then I'm simply going to sew the strap. So fold the end under, and with the raw edge facing upwards, I'm going to sew that to the wrong side of the fabric. So on the inside here I've got the folded edge, so you don't see a raw edge. Then that goes over to the other side here. Just make that neater. Raw edge up, just behind the top, and pin. Do the same on this side. I'm just cutting off those ends of threads. So that's facing. I'm just folding over by about 1/2 inch. Or just over 1 centimetre. Let's pin there. Fold this back over. They cross over, remember, make sure that's not twisted. And at this point, I mean, be careful with pins obviously, but you could retry this on the child and make sure that the straps are in the right place. And then just on the inside, I'm going to sew just backwards and forwards across each one of the straps to secure it. Just make sure you don't sew over the pins while you're doing this. I should have pinned from the other side really. So I'll take that out. And again, if you've got any of these threads that seem to appear from nowhere, let's trim these off to make it nice and neat. Okay, now when you're measuring for straps, that would have been the ideal time to measure the length as well. Knowing particularly how children don't like to keep still for very long, so while they were there, check on the length. So the final thing that we need to do here is just to turn the hem over a couple of times and sew, and then we're finished. So I'm going to do this just in the same way as I did around the top. So let me find the back seam. I always like to start and stop at the back where it's not quite so noticeable. And I'm just going to fold over once, fold over twice, and sew all the way around. And that's by about 1/4 inch. So we're taking this up by just over, by 1/2 inch or just over 1 centimetre. So again, if you wanted to press this first, that may make it easier if you're not used to hemming. And if you wanted to stick a few pins in there, then that's absolutely fine. So we're finished, apart from one final press, because things always look better when they've had an iron, don't they? So I'll just press around the hem very quickly, and then it's ready to wear. So let's try this on for size. So the seam at the back, that's what I was just looking for, it tends to disappear a little bit. And the straps are crossed at the back. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope I've explained how easy it is to use shirring elastic and to make really simple little dresses like this that I think look a lot more expensive than the fabric's going to cost you to make it. So enjoy making yours. I hope you make lots, and I shall see you again next time. Bye bye.